Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Step Into Story Writing Room. I'm Barbara Tanner Wallace. I'm here with my partner of crime, Donna Allward. And between us, we've written nearly 100 novels, most of them Donna's. And we are now paying it forward by sharing what we know.
Which isn't much, but we try.
We're trying. No, we know quite a bit. But we're on episode 3 of our Writing the Novel series.
Yeah.
We've covered planning and we've covered pre-writing, and now we're going to get into the actual work. So for that reason, this episode's going to be a little longer than most. We're going to try and jam pack in some information. We hope you'll get a lot out of it. And as always, we'll leave some of the notes in the story notes as well.
Yeah. So, like, plotting and structure is actually one of those weird times when Barb and I actually agree on our process a little bit, in that neither one of us are huge plotters, but we like to have a basic framework. And so, again, I think every episode that we do in this series should come with the caveat of, like, there's no one right way to write a story, so whatever works for you. And so take whatever information you get from this session and apply it to your book or your process. And so before we kind of launch in, let's kind of talk about, like, what we're actually talking about today. So we're talking about plot and story structure. And so plot is the action of your story. So it's the events. It is the problems and the changes that happen between page 1 and the end. But the structure is the framework that fits inside. And so think of it in terms of a vacation. So since Daryl and I went on a vacation to Iceland last year, and Barb and Pete are looking at doing the same this year. So I like a detailed itinerary all laid out. And it doesn't mean that I won't move things around if something happens, like it rains and we move something inside and whatever. But I like a detailed itinerary, and Daryl likes someone else to do the planning. So he's always like, oh, if you plan it, I'll go. Pete's kind of happy with hopping on a plane and just figuring things out as you go along. And Barb likes to plan 1 or 2 big things and then sort of, play the rest by ear. So, like, 4 very different ways. But no matter how we plan that trip, it still starts on the beginning day of the vacation and it ends on the ending day of the vacation, right? The length of it
never changes.
Right. The length of it never changes. It's finite. So a book is the same way. It doesn't matter if you're a pantser or a plotter or somewhere in between. You still need a framework within which to put your story. Otherwise, you've just got a bunch of random stuff thrown together. And sometimes that works when you're cooking, but most times not so much. So structure allows you to organize your plot in a cohesive manner. And while there are a lot of ways to organize your story, all stories have had the same basic structure since humans started telling each other stories, in that they have a beginning and a middle and an end. So over to you.
I know. So today we're going to talk about the simplest and easiest way to organize your story, which is called the 3-act structure. And Donna's chuckling because I'm a very straightforward, simple girl. I like my information presented very straightforwardly.
So do I.
Yeah, when you go to these talks and they start talking about and getting the elixir or the resolution or the reversal or the beat sheet, and all it does is mess me up. I like it nice, give me nice, simple, explain to me how to set my story up so it moves forward. Now, what I have figured out is you need something, because if you don't have a roadmap at all, like Donna said, like I have tried to write a book by sitting down and just typing and seeing where it goes, and I can't. So even if you're kind of pantsing it, which Donna's a big pantser, she likes to be much looser in her book, but even she needs to have certain milestones that she knows exist. Because otherwise, you're just going to randomly go off into a bunch of scenes.
And also, it's easier to do that if you are, like, if I'm writing a 50,000 word romance, it's easier to do that because you're not, it's more conflict driven than actual plot driven. So I could never do that with historical fiction, right? So it's very, very different. The level at which I can pants.
Right. Well, that's true. And the more complicated the story, the more you're going to move.
So that's what I was trying to say.
This is what the 3-act structure looks like in its barest bones form. I'm going to put this up. See? All right, you got 3 acts. You got your beginning, you got your middle, and you got your end. Right? The first act, I'm going to read this because it's easier. The first act is where your story begins. This is where you're going to establish your characters, build their world, etc. And then you get to the middle. That's where the action of your story is. That's where they face their challenges, make decisions, change, etc. And then you have your end where they resolve their problems and challenges in a satisfying way. Okay, it doesn't mean happy, it just means satisfying. So there's 2 things to notice. The first thing you want to see is that there's lines dividing the section. It's the transitions from beginning to the middle to the end. These are your transition points where the story is going to change or there's going to be some kind of complication, something that's going to shift the story to a new direction. You notice now also what you have is a very large middle. 50% of your book is the middle.
Yeah, give or take.
Give or take, right. Nothing is specific, but approximately 50%. So right in the middle or fairly around the middle is the midpoint. You have a lot of pages and you're going to have to constantly move forward. So you want to look at the middle as a place where you're going to hit a major story complication, a major twist, something that's going to keep the middle from sagging and really push you towards the end. Like in a mystery, it would be where the second body shows up. In a romance, it might be the first love scene or where the heroine realizes that she's fallen in love, but the hero doesn't feel the same. It's important to note that this doesn't have to be physical events. These can be emotional events. They can be, apparently I downloaded the wrong one. The transition scenes complicated, but they don't have to be, they can be physical or emotional. Like I said, it could be the midpoint, could be she discovers that she's in love with the hero. And then you have your third transition point, which is turning yourself into the end. It's about at the 3/4 mark. Something is going to, that transition throws the entire resolution in jeopardy. What you thought was going to happen now suddenly is either not going to happen, like is the killer going to get away, or did the caper fall apart? Is Ma going to lose the farm? There's like one great big question that needs to be answered to settle everything up. And that's usually the last quarter, like I said, and that's dedicated to solving that last problem. So I'm going to give you a better way to explain it because that's kind of vague where I'm going turning points from place. I'm going to turn to my favorite example, which I say is, go back into it, the best example of 3X structure around. And that is Law and Order original recipe. Okay, not SVU, not criminal intent. We got to stick with the original recipe.
Dun dun.
Dun dun. So yeah, I feel like going, Jesse. Okay, at the start of the show, all right, right at our start, you get your dead body. You meet your detectives. You learn about the crimes from the clues, and usually the forensics guy's there to tell you like, no, she was dead a couple hours. Oh, no, look, this wine bottle was half drunk. And then Lenny Briscoe says something super, super sarcastic. They investigate. They start asking questions. They come up with a suspect. What are you doing there, dear?
I know. I'm sorry. I hit a button and I totally messed this up. There we go.
All right. So then they find a suspect and they say, I think you need to come down to the station. Boom. Commercial. End of first transition. End of Act 1. All right. So now you come back from commercial. Suspect has an alibi. Not the right killer. They have to continue investigating. Questions are raised and answered. They discover the real suspect and they arrest him for murder. There is your midpoint. They've got their suspect. Remember I said it shifts the story into a new direction? Well, in this case, you break from a commercial, you come back, and you're now in the order side. You're no longer in law. Now you're at order. And you've got the ADA, and she is trying to gather evidence and fight in the judge's chambers and trying to get the case ready for trial. And you go for the next 15 minutes of her gathering and actively trying to push the thing to a satisfying conclusion. Act 3, which comes after our third commercial, is the trial itself. And you don't know who's going to win. We have our testimonies. We have our usually more judges' chambers action. And it's not here, but everyone who's ever watched Law and Order knows what happens at 9:55. It is the 955 twist. It is where the person doesn't get convicted like we thought, or we get the missing piece of information we needed to finally get the guy. Something happens to really nail the ending. You will often find this called the black moment, or a final twist. A lot of times it's a mystery, it's a twist. A lot of times in a romance, it's the all is lost moment. But those are the parts. If you notice, it's always broken up into 15 quarter sections, and that is the perfect 3-act structure.
Yeah. That does follow it quite well.
It does perfectly.
Yeah.
So, but it also can apply, since we did a TV show, but we should probably apply it to a book.
Yeah, and so
since it's a book about show about books,
you nominated me to do this today.
I did. Yes.
Okay, and I am going to do the book I'm revising right now, which is my historical fiction. Which actually doing this little exercise made me realize that I do have a 3-act structure. Go me.
You have multiple storylines.
I do. I have two storylines that run concurrently but not together. So the beginning introduces our two main characters, who are Nora and Charlotte. And we find out that Nora is a nurse working at the Camp Hill Hospital. And we learn about her ambitions and dreams and her problems. This is 1917. And then on the other storyline is Charlotte, and she is a war widow with a young child who lives with her husband's family. She's profoundly unhappy. And so the beginning,
Act 1,
right, introduces us to those characters and sort of what makes them tick. But then there's usually a turning point something will happen that will launch us into Act 2. And so that turning point or transition point is the Halifax explosion. And it does happen about 25% of the way through the book. So at that point, everything changes for both of these characters, even though these characters don't even know each other. It changes everything for both of them. So now we're into the bulk of the book, that middle 50-ish%, where most of the story happens. And this means we have a series of smaller transition points or turning points that all lead up to the next big one. And each beat, like if you call it a beat or a turning point or a pinch point, however you're used to whatever you call it,
just to interrupt, just so you know, I call it the stuff that happens in here. Builds.
Okay, well, you have to have stuff that happens.
The stuff that happens.
It has to actually happen. And but I mean, because I'm going to get to that point in a sec. But it must complicate your plot further, and it must develop your plot further, and lead you closer to that all is lost moment that launches us into the third act. Because otherwise, if it's just stuff that happens, it doesn't actually sort of turn things enough or complicate things enough, and you end up with saggy middle. Like we talk about the sagging middle. And a lot of times it's because you need to go deeper with your plot, or you can't be circular with it. So I don't use a beat sheet or any chart of any sort that shows me when I'm supposed to have action. For me, it's more intuitive. So if I'm writing along and I find that a scene is going very slowly, it's not coming together. I'm not in the groove. Or if I'm bored, if my own writing bores me, I'm like, oh right, like I don't have enough going on. And Donald Maass is kind of famous for saying you have to have conflict on every page. And I'm not sure if I would use the term conflict necessarily, but there needs to be tension. And there needs to be a point to every scene. So as you work through that middle section, and I'm kind of focusing on here because this is where people tend to have the most problem. When you work on that middle section, each scene must move the plot forward and or change your character in some way. and in a new way. So they're changed. They're not the same person they were before. You can't just have a circular plot that to fill the space because it needs more words, because that's when middles get saggy and readers get bored. And so then we get to, and I don't want to give plot points away because the book's not out yet, but we do get to a midpoint where this is a little more like that big thing that happens at the beginning of Act 1 is the explosion. The midpoint is something a little more internal, and it's more about both of these characters making big decisions on what direction their life is going to go. And so that all leads to that final transition point going into Act 3. And it bears mentioning that actually neither of my characters have interacted with each other up until this point. So the big transition point is actually their meeting that launches us into that last 25%. Their storylines converge, everything comes to a head and is then resolved in that last 25%. Whew. And that's my 3 acts.
No, and what I've often heard it described as if you look at it, you're climbing a mountain and you're building and you're going in an upward trajectory. I wish I had a pencil so I could draw on it. But you're going on an upward trajectory until you get to that third transition point. And then from there, you're heading down. So your climax is usually your third transition point is also your climax of your story. I know we said that the midpoint was the big change. And it is, because it's frequently like a major turning point for a character. And it shifts the story into overdrive and gets you to that third point. And then that third point is when everything kind of explodes. I'll use, in my book, for example, it's about a group that's coming together as a clique. And there's multiple storylines going on, but the big storyline is at the turning point, you've got your group that's forming. At the turning point, they discover the new it girl standing on the corner. Right. And she becomes an it girl and she poses for a very iconic photo. And then as we grow to the middle of the midpoint, the group itself becomes famous and there's a story about them and they become iconic. And then we build again to the third point where the group has exploded and everyone's had to make a decision about their future. And some people's future is not good. Some people's futures have gone a different direction, and everyone's life has gone in a different direction at that point. And our iconic woman is lost because what she needed and what she had was that group, and it's now gone. Right. And then from there, we have to build a conclusion about what happens to them.
But having read your book, in at least the complete book, or most of it, your midpoint is actually when something happens that changes the dynamic of the group, and it can never go back to being the way it was before. Like you see all these little fractures kind of building, but there's something that happens that changes the dynamic of the group. That's a huge deal.
Right. And what I will say is this is when you have multiple storylines, because I'm just talking, there's the storyline of the group and then you have your individual storylines. And I had put the slide up before and I'll go back to put it back up again, which is every storyline that you have is going to have 3 acts. Yeah. So if you have multiple characters or multiple subplots, they're all going to have the same thing. They're all going to have to rise to a climax and break. And they may not all be the same length. Okay. Right. You do not have to have all your midpoints at the same place, all your climaxes at the same place. And in fact, most of the time they won't. Your subplots will resolve themselves much earlier. And they'll be introduced much later. So they'll be much smaller, but make sure they all have beginning, middle, and end. You can't just introduce them and then have them do a bunch of things and then suddenly out of nowhere say, hey, we're getting married or whatever. Right. Make sure that they have that beginning, middle, and end, and that they have that rising tension where every scene that features them or the people or features the storyline gives a reaction that increases the tension.
Right, because each individual character has their own arc that follows that structure. Exactly. And then those together form a complete story arc that also has that structure, which when you think about it, it's actually more complicated than it sounds. And yet very simple. And yet not.
Right. One of the reasons I love the 3x structure is you really only need to know those major points for all your characters and storylines. You need to know that they're going to find the woman. They need to know that there's going to be an explosion. They need to know that something's going to happen at the hospital. You only need to know those, and then you have that wiggle room where you can play with your characters and let them grow. When you try to, for me, a lot of the stuff with beat sheets and story, heroes' journeys or whatever, are trying to force the story into a formula that doesn't always fit, and you're
Right.
To me, it stagnates the writing and it drags me down and it drags my book down. Whereas if I have the freedom to let my characters kind of grow and surprise me, sometimes I have to go back and do a lot of revision because I push things, but it gives me the room to let the characters surprise you and let you have.
And you can make decisions along the way without them being preordained and feeling like you are, slavish to a certain plot or exactly. Like a number of. It can start to become. Of course, it depends on the person again. Like some people really like outlining that way, and we talked about that last month. But for me, if I tried to write that way, it would end up being very episodic.
Me too.
And very prescriptive. And so I think it's way better if I allow, I have that basic framework, but then I allow my characters and me, because I'm the goddess when I'm writing, but to make those decisions along the way, as long as they serve the story and advance either the plot arc or the character arc or both.
Now, that's not to diss a lot of these other books completely. And a lot of these tools are better for revision because you should have the freedom in your first draft to play, but it does then help you clean up your framework. It's like you play around the design of the house or design the itinerary for your trip and throw in everything, and here's your wish list. And then you got to be like, okay, let's narrow it down now because the budget is only this. And obviously we've covered this in 22 minutes. We've thrown a ton of crap at you.
It's simple though. We've kept it simple.
And there is a ton more to know about structure. It is structure and how you use it and how you use it to plot, and the whole concept of scenes, building upon scenes and increasing tension. That is a science in and of itself.
Yeah, we could spend hours and hours.
Right. We could spend weeks talking about this. So as always, we encourage you to go study more. And there's several great guides that we like. I am a big fan of Plot and Structure by JamesScott Bell because it explains it a lot better as far as scene and reaction.
I have not read that.
I read it a long time ago, and I actually plan to reread it. I want to reread it this summer.
Yeah. And I like Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, which it's funny because I don't actually use beat sheets, and that's one of the big things. But I think what I take away from it so much is how he breaks down different. It's based on movies mostly, and how he breaks down movies into the different acts in the structure, and it makes sense when you look at it. I think it's the application that I really enjoy from that. And then writing the Breakout novel by Donald Maass, who's super agent extraordinaire, and he's done a bunch of books.
I can't recommend that book enough. It's a great book.
Yeah, I have the workbook as well.
I do too. There's a workbook too, which you put a pencil and paper. An interesting note regarding the whole movie thing, that is actually what causes my problems, because so many books, especially books written by women or for women, are very cerebral. They're not journeys. And movies are based on this very solid model that was created by the hero's journey. And women have a different kind of journey where they're looking for fulfillment, or a lot of books they're just not journeys. They're about, so you're sitting there trying to figure out, like, for example, Paper Palace, where the woman's falling in love with a childhood friend, but then she gets married to someone else, and we hear about her marriage, but then the childhood friend comes back, and we're questioning all we know about relationships and this hidden secret. And it's like, it's a great book, but I'm like, how on earth would you fit that into the hero's journey? Like, where's the elixir? Where's this?
Right.
And I think so many books, especially literary books and books by women, don't fit the hero's journey, which then confuses you, because when you look at it from Star Wars or any rom-com or anything like that, you're like, yeah, hey, this makes total sense. And then you sit down to do it on your own, and you're like, and it doesn't make any sense. So what did I do wrong? That's where it screws me up, which is
yeah,
why
I
I
think-
like the 3X structure, because I always can find a beginning, middle, and end.
And I think this is where, you know, we say again that it's whatever works for you,
Yeah,
because
that is
I don't have that. I don't find I have that same problem with that, but I do have the problem with the hero's journey, though.
Yes,
Right? Like where it's like 12 steps or whatever. Like I've never been like, everyone raves about Robert McKee's story. I can't do it. I can't do it. So it's one of those things where you just have to find what works for you.
Exactly.
Hopefully something from today might be helpful or reassuring. It doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, if the hero's journey works for you, then fantastic. Or beat sheets, or however you want to break it down.
Points, whatever.
But if it doesn't, and you just want something that is simple, that gives you a little bit of framework, and then that you can play in, you know, you build the sandbox and then you can play in it, then whatever. But you know, our goal is always just to kind of give you some information from our perspective, and then hope something helps.
And not to continue beating a dead horse, but that's what I do. All those other versions, you know, the Save the Cat and the Pyramid and the Hero's Journey, even there's a Heroine's Journey, there's a Crisis one. What do they all have in common? Come on, say it down with me. Beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
They all have 3 acts. So
yeah, in the end, it all fits into a 3-act structure.
That's right.
It really does.
So if you can understand that at first, and understand that you are slowly building through different chunks, that'll help you a lot. Yeah. So that's our brief little lesson on.
See, it wasn't too long today. I didn't think it would be.
If you had one plotting tip, what would you share?
Oh boy! Oh boy! Oh boy! Honestly, it would be about the saggy middles, and it really is make sure that every scene has a job to either forward the plot or develop the character further, or preferably both together.
Yeah, that would actually be mine too. That, and make sure that the scenes build upon each other. Do not have a scene that's just randomly in there without having a reaction to a.
Yeah.
You know, if something happens in your scene, like what was it I was reading about? They were talking about a book where somebody was lynched, and in the next scene they were having a conversation, but they weren't reacting to the lynching.
Right.
And the lynching actually affected them. So you don't want to just have random scenes. Everything should somehow fold together, action, reaction, you know, and then this happened, and then this happened.
And everything changes the trajectory just that little bit, so that it all builds on each other till it builds up to that midpoint, and then it builds up to that moment where you go into the 3rd act. And so, yes, it can't just be, otherwise it is then episodic. Right.
And yes, and exactly what you said, everything should build upon change. It has to have a point. If your scene doesn't have a point to the story, you know, if it's just a fun scene because you wanted to write it, that's what
the delete button is for.
So,
I know, because I'm actually deleting some scenes.
I know that too.
But you know, it's not okay. But here's the thing, and I guess maybe this is a little like PS tip, is that it's not that my scenes didn't work to develop things. It's that some of these scenes I can combine what has to happen in those scenes with other scenes to bring some stuff forward and put other stuff more in the background, so that I'm bringing stuff forward that's more important.
Right.
And so
they were in the wrong order. In my case, things happened that you realize, okay, you know what? That should happen sooner.
Oh, interesting.
Or that should be mentioned sooner.
I've had those kinds of revisions before too, where I've played with the structure a little bit. And actually for me, I don't really have to move anything around. It's more, this scene isn't working hard enough, so let's get rid of it. If there's anything in this scene that really needs to happen, find a way to put it in a different scene to make that scene work harder.
But that's the key right there. The scene has to work.
The scene has to work hard. Yeah. So anyway, so next month we're going to talk about characterization and goals, motivation, and conflict, which I'm super excited about.
I know that's your favorite topic. I like
it. Is. I like it so much more than plotting.
I just want to talk about Law and Order.
Right. Well, okay. Well, pick another show, Barb. Pick something else that you like about GMC or something. Well, you have a month to think about it.
I do. Actually, I have a GMC one too. Yeah, I know.
There you go. Before we go, though, I want to let everybody know about the broadcast we have coming up next week, which is March 7th at 7 p.m. We're joined by Jana G. Noel from HF Chit Chat. And we're talking about Things Past Telling by Sheila Williams. And I'm going to say right now, this is an early contender for my top book of the year. The more I finished it, and then the more time goes on, the more I look at it, and the more I'm in awe of it. Yeah. So it's one of those that's really sticking with me, which is a really good sign. So, you're not going to want to miss our chat with Jana coming up next Tuesday.
And if you're one of the lucky people who's watching it live tonight, when we're done, go on Twitter and join the hashtag HF Chit Chat, because they're going to be doing, if you write historical fiction, it is a great way to meet other authors who are writing them, and you'll get some great reading recommendations. That's where we found Things Past Telling. And we discovered Joan through them. There's a lot of books that we've discovered that we would not have read otherwise. It's a great group of people. You will talk writing. You will learn and meet some great writing community contacts.
Also, Gabriella saw last month's book chat book was she's a founding member of HF Chit Chat. So we found some really great stuff through there.
That's it. And if you're a new writer and you're looking to talk to people about writing, there's no place better than to go on and
it's a fun.
Like this. You'll meet new friends. You'll have people you can actually ask questions to, and it's a great opportunity. So that's on right after us. So
that's it.
Head on over. All right.
It's good to see everybody today.
Good to see everyone. If you liked it, please subscribe to our channel. We are almost a real channel.
Oh, no, we're so
like
close.
93 or 94 people subscribe.
Yeah.
Or come to our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/step into the story.
All right. See you next time.
Bye-bye.